tell Beth.
Good evening. We're going to have a little delay of about 2 minutes. Our attorney is on his way. I just called him. He'll be here within a minute, so hang in there. We're going to start 2 minutes late. And I would appreciate it if everybody claps when he walks in. We'll get him, huh?
They said Thursday. I saw signs up today. They said it's
What's going to,
Main Street Extension.
they're going to fix it?
Thursday. Size. Supposed to do it before we.
Right.
It's not easy. Usually, sometimes they have the weather.
You handle the 55 and older in Monroe? Yeah. He put his house on the market on Monday morning. Sold it Monday at noon. Full price, cash. No, it's electric. Most of them.
Thank you so much.
Majority of the ones in Concordia, there's like a third of the buildings that have gas. The last.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're so kind.
Can't have fun, you might as well go home.
Oh, he's in the driving. That's this.
Evening? All right, we might as well stand. Good evening. If you'd all stand, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you for coming to the August 21st Planning Board. Madam Secretary, are we in accordance with the sunshine laws?
Yes, Chairman, we are.
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Okevich? Here. Councilman Delana? Mr. Davis? Mr. Kelly? Ms. Lee? Mr. McEnone? Ms. O'Leary? Mr. Velosan? Ms. Montilla? Chairman Ty?
Here.
Mr. Rogoff?
Here.
Mr. Cornell? Mr. Leo Cavello?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, our first order of business is the memorialization of resolutions to Saraville Economic Redevelopment Agency, Sarah, minor subdivision for the River Road Development, blocks 175, lot 9, 10, 11, 12.03, and 12.04, and blocks 176, lots 102 and 204. Need a motion to accept those?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman, that we accept those.
Second, all in favor? Any nays? The ayes have it. Okay, I need an acceptance for last week's minutes.
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes of last week's meeting.
Second, all in favor? Any opposed? The minutes are accepted. The agendas, all right, we have a site plan subdivision hearing here for the Place at Saraville LLC, Block 175, Lot 1001. Mr. Nelson?
Chad Warnken of Archer and
Oh,
Griner.
okay. Well, you didn't make the paperwork, but we'll take you anyway.
Well, thank you. Again, Chad Warnken of Archer and Griner on behalf of the applicant.
Okay?
We're here for preliminary site plan approval for an 89 residential housing apartments. 88 of those are affordable. One is going to be a superintendent's apartment. This is for preliminary site plan only. The apartments are in the affordable housing district of the River Road redevelopment plan. The proposed development is to implement the borough's settlement agreement with the Fair Share Housing Center that was dated back in May of 2018, and to resolve the borough's Mount Laurel Fair Share housing obligations. The applicant is the named redeveloper for the affordable housing site and has entered into an agreement with the borough on that. At this time, we'd be asking again for the board for preliminary site plan approval only. There are some timing constraints. That's why we're seeking that at this point. There is one issue I just wanted to raise right up front. We had noticed for and applied for a variance with respect to the buffer between the proposed project and the residential properties. Based upon comments we had received in the review letters, we're able to modify the plan to respect the 50-foot buffer between the project and the residential homes on Main Street. The architect and the engineer will describe that in more detail, but we just wanted to lay that out right up front.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Does that mean that the application's variance-free?
No, it's the one area of the variance is going to be modified. A variance is still going to be needed for another
Just
spot.
talking about that one area.
That one area that can be compliant.
Oh, good. I tried to get it all. I could only get that, though. All right, go ahead. It's all yours.
Okay.
I just need you to make some of these reports a part of the record, so we can get into evidence.
Sure thing.
And ask you a few questions about them.
Yep.
The first report is prepared by Jay Cornell, dated August 21, 2019. From CMA. Did you get that?
We did.
There's a report from our planner, John Leon Cavallo, dated August 19, 2019. Did you receive that?
We did.
And there are a lot of attachments to Mr. Cornell's report, including my legal memo
Which we had receipt of.
and the redeveloper agreement. You received that as well?
Correct.
Do you agree to make those reports a part of the record, enter them in evidence with respect to this matter?
We do.
Are there any terms and conditions in either of those reports that you can't comply with, particularly the engineer's report?
We can generally comply with the engineer's report. There, and I can let Mr. Zelina testify to that. We've been in discussions with the engineer. We believe those items can be resolved by the time of final approval. There are certain items we
You have to speak into the mic.
There are certain items that we will address that we cannot comply with at the time
Hold on,
of.
somebody in the back is,
He's speaking into the mic, Al. If you can't hear, come on up front.
yeah, there's a whole. The attorney isn't speaking into the mic. All right, sorry, you're right. How about now, can you hear me? So anyway,
I never had that problem.
I normally don't either, but, I'm gonna assume that your client is gonna agree to all the terms and conditions unless you tell me to the contrary,
Correct.
all right?
And one final thing, I just wanted to confirm that we had provided our notice package and the service is appropriate.
I reviewed the notice, and I reviewed the public notice that went in the newspaper, and we have jurisdiction to entertain this matter.
Thank you. Mr. Zelina?
Good evening.
Sir, you want to raise your right hand?
Yes, sir.
You swear the testimony you swore or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
I do. My name is Mark, with a K, Zelina, Z-E-L-I-N-A. I'm a senior associate with the firm Macer Consulting. I'm the engineer of record for the plan that we're going to discuss here this evening.
You hear? Can you hear him?
I'm sorry.
It doesn't sound like it's amplifying.
And I, there we
There you
go.
go.
Okay. I had appeared before this board previously, and I am a licensed, got my license, I continue my license as a licensed professional engineer.
Do I have a motion to accept his credentials? Second? All in favor? Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
All right,
Thank you.
I'll try to keep up the volume a little bit here. The first exhibit I have over for you this evening, which I'll mark A1,
That's a colored rendition of that which is contained in the subdivision plan, or not the site plans?
that is correct.
All right, A1.
And it's a colored rendition of the preliminary plat for the minor subdivision. And I just brought it up first just to illustrate the property that's being discussed this evening, or the piece of property that's being developed. The lot under consideration is proposed, what was formerly proposed lot 10.01, but after today's resolution is now lot 10.01, and on this on the exhibit, it's the light pink area on the board. It contains 13.745 acres, and it is in the affordable housing district under the redevelopment plan. Just for the record, it has frontage on Sayreville Boulevard. It has limited frontage on Main Street. The small leg here, there's a deep ravine there, so that's totally inaccessible. And there's a little bit more frontage a little bit further to the southeast, impacted somewhat by wetlands. For the record, we are not proposing any access anywhere on Main Street. You'll see on the plans for the development, access to the development, both for utilities as well as cars and whatnot, will all be to Sayreville Boulevard. And that's the purpose of that exhibit.
Okay. Mark, can you next bring up your next exhibit, which is the site plan? We're going to mark this A2.
It's fine, A2. A2.
And Mark, can you describe what that is for the board?
Yes, I can. Exhibit A2 is it's entitled the Sayreville River Road Site Plan Exhibit. This is a colored rendering of the site plan that has been submitted in the package to the board in advance of this meeting. And it's important, I want to review this a little bit because in a few minutes we're going to discuss the modified site plan. But it's important for me to illustrate that the modified site plan is very similar to the plan that was submitted and is included in your package.
And just for confirmation, the modification is based as a direct result of the comments received by the planning board's professionals, correct?
That and some of the public in attendance at the subdivision plan meeting last week.
Okay, thank you.
But first of all, the project proposes 88 affordable units, plus one additional unit for a superintendent's unit. They'll be located in 5 separate buildings, all of which will be 3 stories. The 5 buildings are clustered around a parking lot. Parking is provided, adequate parking is provided for each unit, and appropriate circulation in and around the units, both for car circulation as well as trucks, emergency vehicles, trash vehicles and whatnot, and we have an exhibit to demonstrate that a little bit more. But as I mentioned initially, access is provided from Sayreville Boulevard via a boulevard entrance road, approximately 800 feet long, and to the parking court. The boulevard adjoins some additional property that is zoned for senior development, and the boulevard has been designed to provide access to that additional development should it ever take place. But that's not part of the application here today. So in addition to the 5 residential buildings proposed by the development, there's a clubhouse and a little tot lot. The clubhouse is 1,750 square feet. Single family, or I'm sorry, single story, 1 story, as opposed to the 3 stories for the residential buildings.
And again, there's no connection out to Main Street, correct?
None whatsoever. The site's interesting in the fact that it slopes from the south to the north. All the stormwater runoff runs to the north currently, as it will in the post-developed state. We've provided for a stormwater management system. It does not appear on this rendering because it's an entirely underground, a completely underground system, a series of underground pipes and inlets, pipes, and water quality devices as well, so that all the stormwater runoffs gathered through the site and tied into an existing pipe system in Sayreville Boulevard, which someone had the forethought at the time at Sayreville Boulevard. Not only did they provide a storm water collection system adjacent to this site, they've also extended sanitary sewer along that side of Sayreville Boulevard, which we will be able to tie in a gravity sewer system to an existing manhole on our side of Sayreville Boulevard. Potable water will also be provided from an existing line in Sayreville Boulevard. We do have to cross into the street there for that service. At some point in the future, we'll do fire hydrant tests to determine the available capacity and pressure in Sayreville Boulevard and determine whether we need a connection to Main Street or not. Take notice of the layout of this plan. There are 4 buildings clustered in one area, then another building at the very southeasterly corner. When this plan was originally proposed, we had provided, you'll see there's some parking adjacent or to the rear of some of the residents along Main Street, the driveway, and then the tot lot and clubhouse, which infringed or encroached upon what a 50-foot buffer, a landscape buffer that's required by the ordinance or by the redevelopment plan in this zone. So as we alluded to in the beginning of the presentation, we had some feedback that said maybe that's not such a good idea. So we went back to the drawing board and we moved things around a little bit, tightened up the layout a little bit, and we presented a new design, which we have in our next exhibit, which eliminates the need for a variance for that buffer. So we're able to lay out this development and respect the 50-foot landscape buffer that's required along those residential properties.
Right, and Mark, just to clarify, the variance is needed in another area still, but we're respecting it with respect to those residences on Main Street, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. What I failed to describe is, as far as the layout of this project site, there's a large JCP&L right-of-way along that borders this site to the east, 150-foot wide, and then there's some additional right-of-ways and easements that border the site. And you can see it had been disturbed previously and by some other activities. But that borders this site immediately to the right. So the other variance that we're talking about has to do with the setback, the landscape buffer along that easternmost property line. The way the redevelopment plan reads, a 50-foot landscape buffer is required between the project site and any adjacent residential properties or zones. Under the redevelopment plan, the adjacent lands to the east are in fact zoned for residential development, as is the property to the west as well. We meet the buffer along the west, but you'll see later on with some testimony from our planner that we do not quite provide the 50-foot buffer required along the easternmost property line. We were able to respect it along the southerly property line with the residents. We still, as was the question earlier, we still will requesting a variance for the buffer and the setback into the landscape buffer along the easternmost
How
property
short
line.
are you?
We're
20 feet.
20 feet, so you have 30-foot of buffer, plus the 50-foot that the power line has?
150, in excess of 150.
So you're 180,
If you include the power line.
okay.
It's not on our property, but that's
But
the adjacent land use next to us.
And so that means there's not going to be any residential uses within 180 feet of the property line.
That is correct. Now, at least 150 feet, because the 30-foot buffer is on our property.
I'm sorry, that's, just to clarify, that's along, I guess that's the rear of Building 3? I just want to be clear where that.
Sure.
Where that buffer relief is being requested.
Why don't we, Mark, why don't we bring up the new exhibit, because that's going to be the plan that we're going to be going for, and make it life a little
All right,
easier.
as long as I have, the actual dimensions and location.
Yeah.
It is behind Building 1 and 3, and 5, I guess. It's the entire, well, outside of the parking lot areas on the east side of the development between the,
That's along that Jersey Central Power and Light easement?
yes.
Correct.
There's no homes impacted over there?
None.
That's correct.
So we're going to ask to mark this A3, which is the modified site plan, which has been done in response to the board and public's comments about that buffer.
Make that A3?
Exhibit A3 is titled the Sayreville River Road Revised Site Plan Exhibit. If you'll note, the layout of the project site is very close to the original plan. The access road comes from Sayreville Boulevard into a court of 4 buildings, and then further to the 5th building in the southeast corner. What we were able to do is flip-flop some buildings so that what was previously a 17-unit building is now a 12-unit building. It enabled us to reduce some of the parking around that building and pull out any of the disturbance into that landscape buffer in that area. We removed the driveway between the units, and we were able to pull or to move the parking and clubhouse and tot lot out of the 50-foot buffer here as well. So what we have on this plan now is an undisturbed, well, I don't know if it'll be undisturbed at the end, but it'll be a completely landscaped 50-foot buffer between the project site and the existing residential homes along Main Street.
That revised site plan with those modifications, that's been reviewed by our professional staff, is that correct?
If I might, let me just clarify. I was provided with an advanced copy. I had some discussions with Mr. Zelina. I was provided with an advanced copy just to see it, but we have not done a detailed review. So that would be a condition. If the board acts favorably, we'd have to go through and review that. And as we're going to have to anyway before they come back to final, because there's a lot of other engineering issues.
Agree to that?
Yes.
Okay.
Mark, with respect to this revised plan, it does not impact drainage, increased density. We still meet the parking requirements, correct?
That is correct. We have in excess of the number of parking spaces. Just for the record, I'll just enumerate them that with the mix of bedroom units, some of these units are made up of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. For instance, there's 11 one-bedroom units, 52 bedroom units, and 28 three-bedroom units. Based on that unit distribution, under the residential site improvement standards, 179 parking spaces would be required. Then, if you provide for 1 space per 300 square feet for the clubhouse, we would need another. Where's the clubhouse? Right there's the clubhouse. An additional 6 spots would up our requirement to a total of 185 parking spaces for the entire development. What you'll see on this plan is we have proposed a total of 191 parking spaces in and around the residential units and the clubhouse. Not only do we have enough spaces on our gross number, what we've taken great care of is to make sure that we have distributed the parking adequately around each unit so that there is appropriate parking in close proximity to each of the units, based on, in accordance with the calculated requirement. So there's 24 spaces required here, there's 25, and so on and so forth. Around this 24-unit building, there's enough parking, and so on. So the parking is well distributed around the buildings, and we meet we're in excess of that is required. Going back to the utilities, and that's why we felt comfortable presenting this plan this evening, all the utilities remain the same. The water and sewer run out to Sayreville Boulevard, the stormwater management, and the stormwater runs back out to Sayreville Boulevard through the underground system as well. So there will be some modifications required for your engineer to review, but nonetheless, we feel that this is a much improved plan, and we were anxious to present that tonight so that to eliminate that variance that we had previously requested along the buffer along Main Street.
Great. Can you just touch base a little bit about operations, trash?
Absolutely. There are 3 separate dumpster enclosures, one at this corner outside this building, one in this corner, one in the opposite corner.
When you say this building, sir, could you just identify which buildings you're talking about? Because when I look at the transcript, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. There's a dumpster enclosure located to the north of Building 1. to the south of Building 4 and outside, to the north of Building 5. Each of the dumpster enclosures are wide enough to include a dumpster, a trash receptacle for regular trash, as well as recycling. So it's a little bit wider than maybe what we're used to seeing, but we got to make sure that it's wide, appropriate for recyclable materials as well as regular trash materials. I'll just segue that into an exhibit that was a part of the engineer's comments.
So we're going to mark this A4.
A4.
Can you describe A4?
A4 is a highlighted garbage truck circulation exhibit. We've prepared one of these both for a fire truck and as well as a trash removal or garbage truck. So what you'll see in red is what we created from a truck turning template, just to show that there's adequate turning movements that allows a garbage truck to very freely circulate through the site, approach the dumpster, remove the trash, circulate around to the other dumpster, come back out, pick up the other dumpster, and then back out of the site. I think we have very generous curb radii on the site. We've been through this before, so we make sure that there's appropriate areas for both the fire and emergency vehicles as well as the trash vehicles to maneuver through the site without any difficulty.
Oh, the schedule of the project, I know there was a question about the scheduling. It's going to be in conformance with the schedule and the redevelopment agreement?
100%, correct.
Is that phasing?
The planner had asked a question about the construction sequencing and when it's going to start, and it'll be in accordance with the redevelopment agreement with the borough.
Well, for the benefit of the public, can you tell them what that is?
It is, I think we're planning, under the plan is to come back for final by next May. And then from there, it's, it'll move on from there. Each of the exact. Yeah, it's Exhibit B of the redevelopment agreement. The submit for final building in May of 2020, submit for building permit in July of 2020, start construction November of 2020, and we anticipate about an 15-month construction period.
And thank you.
That's essentially an overview of the engineering associated with the project, so unless, I'd be happy to answer questions at this time.
Well, I just want to know, sir, before the board asks you any questions, as it relates to the technical comments made by Mr. Cornell, and more particularly when you're talking about site grading, general comments.
I could save
Do
you
you have
that.
any
We've reviewed
problem
all
with
of those in detail, and we're able to comply with all of them and work with Mr. Cornell through the revision of these plans prior to coming back to see you with final site plan.
Okay, so you're good with everything that's in there?
I am,
Thank you.
Planners report too?
Yeah.
yes. But we have a planner here. Let's hear his testimony to
Okay.
address that a little bit more before I speak to that.
And our planner is also our landscape architect, so he'll talk about landscaping as well.
Lighting and
Anybody from the board have any questions of the engineer? Mr. Kelly?
The property line runs along the right-of-way of Sayreville Boulevard, down along the property line or common boundary line with the JCP&L easement, out to Main Street along the rear of the residential properties, and back to the proposed access driveway, and along the southern line of that driveway. So. You go from Sayreville Boulevard along that road all the way to where it runs out to the map end, and you come down almost like a giant triangle, right? Yes. All of that foliage northwest is part of this lot. It is. What I failed to mention is the lot is, I'll say, severely impacted by wetlands and wetlands transition areas. There was a previous LOI issued on this site back in 2009. The basis, those wetlands limits were the basis for the.
Gotta tell everybody what that means. That's a letter of interpretation.
Yes, it is. Basically, it's a confirmation by the DEP of the wetlands limits on the site. We've applied for an updated letter of interpretation to the DEP. We're waiting that. One of the requirements to get that is that subdivision plan. So now that we have the subdivision in place, we can provide that to the DEP, which shows the limits of the boundaries, which we're seeking the LOI upon. That will happen in very short order. Hopefully, we'll get a response confirming the limits of the wetlands. Mr. Leota will get into a little bit more, but there are wetlands impacting this site. So associated with the wetlands by the DEP, there are transition areas. Under the previous letter of interpretation issued for the site, there are 50-foot wide buffers or transition areas required around the wetlands that are on this site. To develop the site in this manner, we have to average some of those wetlands. The DEP has a provision where you can reduce some of the buffers as long as you replace that buffer somewhere else on the site. The reason why we included this land in this this lot for this subdivision is to provide us with an area where we can utilize for our wetland transition area averaging. We're going to reduce some of the buffer transition areas or buffer areas in and around the development, but we're going to have to replace some of that transition area at some other areas on the site. That's why the lot is bigger than it would normally seem, or it seems why would we include all that in this development? Well, that's the reason why.
And I think what Mr. Kelly might be getting at too is there's no proposal to take those trees down. Those trees are anticipated to remain.
No, those will end up in a conservation easement when we're through with all the DEP permitting and confirmation by the DEP. And we'll have an exhibit later on that'll show that a little bit more clearly. I won't steal our planner's thunder.
Alan, you had a question?
Yeah, under John's report, the project description, it mentions there ancillary recreation areas and amenities. You've mentioned the clubhouse and the top lot. Can you explain what the recreation areas are, how many, where they're at, and what they'll be?
No, that is all that it's proposed. There is proposed in the original there's a community garden located on the original plan that we haven't yet located on the other plan. But beyond the clubhouse, tot lot, and the community garden, there are no other recreational amenities proposed.
Nothing. Other than the clubhouse and the tot lot, that's it.
That's correct. As I mentioned and alluded to, because of the constraints, the environmental constraints on this site, we've done about the best we can to get the 88 units on this site and all the associated parking and driveways and everything around it, so that we don't have a lot of room for other amenities, even with the excess larger than what would appear normal lot area because of the wetlands.
Any other questions? Got another witness?
Did you want to open to the public for this witness, or do you do it at the
We'll
end?
open them up at the end.
Okay, great. We're going to have our landscape architect and professional planner testify now.
He's got to be sworn in and then,
So you want to raise your right hand? You swear the testimony you're about to give, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give the board is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
I do, yes.
Right, can you give your name to the board and your qualifications?
Yes, my name is Raymond Liotta, Liotta. I'm the Director of Landscape Architecture at Mazer Consulting. Business address is 331 Newman Springs Road, Red Bank. I am also a licensed planner with Mazer Consulting, and I'm here in both capacities.
And have you testified before this board before?
Yes, I have testified here. I am licensed as a landscape architect since 1985, and I'm licensed as a professional planner since
I
1988.
need a motion to accept his credentials. Do I have a second? All in favor? Please continue.
Ray, why don't we start off, before we get to the planning testimony, Mark talked a little bit about the site design and the layout. Why don't you describe to the board and to the public what the landscape plans for the project?
Yes, let me start with the landscaping and the lighting aspects. I'm going to refer back to, well, I'll use Exhibit A2, which is the old plan, but the new exhibit that we put up will have the same components in it because we will be complying with the landscape and lighting design requirements within the ordinances. So within the landscape components of the plan, we have a streetscape component, which is along the boulevard aspect from Sayreville Boulevard to the actual development site, and that requires a street tree planting on both sides of the road, as well as a planting within the median of the buffer. There's an open space requirement that indicates any undeveloped property within the development site, which is not building or pavement or those types of improvements, are to be landscaped. This plan does a significant amount of landscaping through those other open space and pervious areas within the site. There is a minimum requirement of 20% of the site to be landscape area. This particular plan, because of all of the wetland and open space areas that will not be disturbed, there's approximately 71% of landscape pervious area throughout the site. We talked a little bit about the buffers, and I think I'd like to introduce a new exhibit which may help show a little bit more of what the buffer situation is.
I think we're up to A5.
Correct.
A5 in evidence.
And can you describe what A5 is, Ray?
Yes, A5 is an exhibit that was prepared under my direction. It's entitled Lot Constraints Exhibit. It's dated with today's date. And let me just orient you to the mapping. The very dark solid line is the project perimeter. So maybe that helps you understand a little bit more about where the property line is to this particular site. The various colors in here, we have a blue line that has a flood hazard designation to it, which kind of meanders around some of the wetland areas and through some of the water facilities or water features on the site. There are long blue dashed lines on the eastern end or the right side of the exhibit, which is the JCP&L exhibit. That's a 150-foot wide power line easement that is just to the northeast of the property. There are also two parallel other JCP&L easements, one of which is an old railroad siding and JCP&L easement, as well as an additional 50-foot JCP&L easement next to it. Those are the red solid lines that are also on the northeast side of the property. And we have a red dashed line that is within the property that I'm tracing right now. That is the required 50-foot buffer line. So as you can see, it is tracing around the area that's adjacent to other property that is either existing residential, such as the units down on Main Street, or the residentially zoned property, which is to the northeast of us or east of the JCP&L power line, and to the west of us and south of Sayreville Boulevard, just to the left on the exhibit. And as you can see, we're respecting the 50-foot landscape buffer at the southern end where it adjoins the residential properties on Main Street. And the location where we do require the variance is along the parking lot side of the northeastern side of the two development sites where the units are. So we're encroaching into the 50-foot buffer at the southeast end, where we have a minimum of approximately 27 feet, And at the north end, we have approximately 42 feet. So we're into that buffer a little bit, but we're immediately adjacent to the JCP&L power line, which is at least 150, but it's more in the neighborhood of up to around 200 feet before we would get to any area that could be developed as residential. Also, technically, the entrance boulevard is actually within the 50-foot landscape buffer as it enters the site immediately adjacent to the adjacent lot, which is also zoned residential, and it's planned for some type of residential in the future. So that's the description and graphic depiction of what the buffer variance is with this application.
Okay, you want to go on to the landscape design?
We also have other landscape design requirements are to vegetate the parking lots with a certain number of trees per 10 car spaces. We have done that. The ordinance requires a certain number. The plan exceeds that number, so we are meeting that ordinance requirement. Now, there was and is a tree inventory requirement. We did comply with submitting, doing the tree inventory and submitting the tree inventory plan and replacement plan. Because this is a redevelopment area and it is an affordable housing development site, we are requesting a waiver from strict compliance on complete satisfaction of all the required number of trees that are indicated on that replacement plan. There is a deficit, and we're requesting a waiver from that because of the affordable housing component, which desires to not add additional cost if necessary. And we believe that the landscape plan sufficiently plants the developed portion of the site, as well as it's surrounded by wetlands and wetland areas that would not be developed and are wooded. The additional colors on the map, the dark green color represents the wetland areas, and the light green color represents the wetland transition areas. So as you can see, the remainder, or the developable portion, is the yellow color. So we have a very irregularly shaped lot. We have a very constrained lot, and we're basically taking the required number of units and fitting it into essentially only the developable portion of the very constrained, environmentally constrained portion of the site. Now, with respect to the lighting plan, we have done the boulevard lighting as required by the redevelopment plan, and we've also used similar type of fixtures. They are a colonial post-top type fixture, both on the boulevard road as well as the interior of the site. We're essentially complying with the ordinance requirements, except that we are asking for a waiver from the 1-foot candle minimum requirement on the sidewalks. We believe that's a little bit excessive for a project like this, and we believe that we're consistent with Illuminating Engineering Society recommendations, for minimum levels of enhanced security, which is a 1/2 foot candle. So we're asking that the plan that we revise meet the 1/2 foot candle standard for enhanced security on the sidewalk areas.
Right, but just
What
clarify.
does the ordinance require?
The ordinance requires a 1-foot candle in all sidewalk areas.
You're proposing a half.
A minimum of a 1/2 foot candle, correct.
Right, but we are going to comply with the 1-foot candle at the entrance driveway, correct?
We can comply with the 1-foot candle on the entrance drive. But primarily, it's in the area of where the lighting fixtures are fairly immediate and close to the buildings, and the sidewalks are essentially right there. So if we achieve 1-foot candle on the sidewalks immediately adjacent to the building, they're actually that's gonna impact those units. and be somewhat of a nuisance to the residents of the units because it's going to be fairly bright. And we're proposing to have a minimum of a half-a-foot candle instead of 1-foot candle throughout the residential portion.
And you believe that's appropriate from a safety perspective as well?
It is appropriate for a safety perspective because it meets the enhanced security minimum standard of Illuminating Engineering Society recommendations.
And the roadway would have the 1-foot candle, which again is in compliance with the ordinance, because again, that's not going to impact the residents in any way, but it.
That is correct. And the lighting plan, in any case, will not have any spillage off-site and will not affect any adjacent residential properties.
Can you just be more specific about where the half-foot candles are going?
What we're asking is that
You said the sidewalks?
the
Sidewalks
stand,
surrounding the building, is that?
it's, the ordinance says all sidewalks. So that means any sidewalks that are shown within the project site itself. So there's a sidewalk on the north side of the boulevard, and then there are sidewalks throughout the residential portion of the project, essentially in front of the buildings and between the buildings.
And
So the
don't-
ordinance requires 1-foot candle on all of those sidewalk areas.
You want the half-a-foot candles on the interior? How do we describe that?
Basically, from the south end of the boulevard where it contacts the first parking spaces throughout the remainder of the developed portion of where the residential units would be. And that from the south end of the boulevard to where it intersects Saraville Boulevard would be 1-foot candle.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, that's it for the.
That's it
engineering.
for the landscape and lighting testimony. I'd like to get a little bit into the planning issues if I can. I'm going to stick a little bit with this exhibit.
Well, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but the tree waiver you're talking about, do you have the numbers?
We do.
I'm going to need those. So is the public.
We conducted the tree inventory per the ordinance requirements. They're based on the number of trees that are being removed and the sizes of the trees being removed. The ordinance would require us to replace 1,732 trees. The plan includes 136 trees, which are meeting the other landscape design components of the ordinance for buffer plantings, parking lot plantings, and other requirements that require trees. So those trees count towards the replacement. But this site is entirely surrounded by vegetated areas, heavily vegetated areas, wetland and wetland transition areas that are going to be preserved. And we've planted the site sufficiently so that we're meeting the other landscape standards. So we believe we've satisfied the aesthetic requirements for landscaping in the site. The site cannot accommodate another 1,700 trees in the project area. So we're asking for a waiver from strict compliance so that that cost does not impact the affordable housing project.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Go ahead.
Concern that from our standpoint we have with regard to the waivers is we're not dealing with a final plan at this point. We have a plan that has a number of engineering issues. You've come in tonight with a plan that's now going to shift buildings, which is going to modify your landscaping and possibly your tree preservation plan. So I think from our standpoint, there's a concern with granting waivers on something that is going to change in the future. So our suggestion would be maybe just hold off those waivers until you come back for final.
We agree with that. I just wanted to get on the record what our position was with a few of those items so that you knew where we were, particularly with this tree replacement issue.
I think from a conceptual standpoint, we understand the constraints on the site and more than likely will agree in the future with some of the waiver requests, but until we can actually tell you what the impacts are, well, I think we'd rather wait, have those final plans, and then we can tell you specifically X number of trees as opposed to what you're throwing out now, which in our engineering report, we had some concerns with some of the numbers anyway, so.
And
Understood.
the applicant's agreeable to that.
Yeah, we understand that, yes. So with respect to the planning issues, let me just reiterate what Mr. Zelina said. We're in the River Road Redevelopment Area Affordable Housing District. So the project itself it's affordable housing, so it's inherently beneficial use, and based on that, we're satisfying the positive criteria necessary for any variance associated with the project. With respect to the variances, the only variance that we're requesting is the variance to the buffer, and the only location where we're actually not providing the buffer that's not impacting anyone is along the PSE&G easement area on the eastern side of the property. There is also no impact to anyone for the boulevard being in that location because it has to be in that location due to the physical wetland constraints and wetland buffer constraints. It can't go anywhere else. We can't get the permits to move the roadway out of that area.
And Ray, just for clarification, I think when you were talking about the impact, you're saying the only spot where it will be is along the JCP&L power line, and it will not impact any residents.
It will not impact residential properties, and if the site to the east is ever developed under the current zoning and the redevelopment plan as residential, the nearest home would be approximately 180 to 200 feet from our property line. So there's essentially no impact to us encroaching 32, 33 feet into the buffer.
Hey, can you explain what you're going to do down near Main Street with that 50-foot buffer? What is that buffer going to actually be?
A majority of that buffer is vegetated now. It's wooded. However, we're going to supplement those areas with additional landscape material as required in the ordinance so that we enhance this existing landscape area so that we have a very solid buffer to allow for screening of the project site to the residential units on Main Street.
Mr. Chairman, to follow up on that, the original plan proposed fencing along that property line. Is that still proposed with the revised?
That is still will still be in the revised plan, yes. And as Mr. Zelina indicated earlier, the project site is actually lower in elevation than the residential home, so we get the advantage of some of that elevation slope down into our site. So as we put evergreen trees and additional landscaping essentially along the property line, we're achieving more impact with those plantings for screening purposes because it's on the highest point or highest elevation of the site and will help screen the buildings even more effectively.
But along the Main Street corridor, you comply with the 50-foot buffer?
We do, yes.
All right.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
I have a question. Ray, to the east of the S&G buffer, that area which might be developed sometime in the future, may not be developed, most of that, my estimation, is floodplain, correct?
It is a combination of wetlands and flood hazard area. It may potentially be developed, but it'd be very challenging.
So, unlikely to happen.
So it's unlikely,
Thank you.
in my opinion. So we talked about the other waiver items. I don't want to reiterate that, but we are proposing the variance issue with respect to the buffer area as a hardship type variance because of the physical constraints associated with the property. As you can see by Exhibit A5, we have significant wetland areas and wetland buffers surrounding the site. We're utilizing all of the developable area to the best extent we can and still provide the number of units we need to provide based on the settlement agreement. And we are not creating any detriment or impact, a negative impact to the residential homes on Main Street. So I think we've done what we can with respect to mitigation, and we've limited any impact to adjacent residential homes, and I believe that we've met the criteria for satisfying that variance request.
Is there fencing along that JCP&L border?
There is not.
So the only, what I brought up before about recreational, and you have family units that are going to be there, believe that property to the east is what the kids in this town refer to as Acapulco, where they go back there swimming and do whatnot. So being as you're not providing anything, I think that's where a lot of the kids are gonna be going. And I have some concerns about that.
I've put Exhibit A1 back up, and the lot to the east of us, this blue lot, is the area we're talking about being completely constrained, and that's the area.
Back up where you show the actual water.
You want to see that one? Okay.
Just can you indicate which plan it is for the record?
Yeah, we'll do. This is Exhibit A2, which shows a better depiction of the water body that's just to the east of the power line.
There's a lot of kids that go back there, cars and bikes, motorbikes.
Yeah, it has evidence of dirt bikes and quads and
Right.
the like being back there.
The applicant is willing to, is at final, to take a look between now and final to see if there's something that we can do to understanding what your
Restrict.
concerns are.
Yeah, I mean, if there's fencing along there, you guys aren't providing any kind of recreational for the families that are gonna be living in these units.
Well, we are, the tot lot, the clubhouse, and the clubhouse, they have different services that they're gonna provide there. And I know there was a discussion about a garden. There are physical constraints on the property as to how much they can do. So we're limited in that way, and it is an affordable housing project, so there's
Right.
a limited ability financing that you can do with that as well. But if we can take a look between now and the final approval to see if there's anything we can do to restrict access to that area. I can't promise anything, but that's something we can look at.
Yeah, take a look at it. Okay, thank you.
That's the end of my direct planning and landscape architecture testimony. I'm open for questions. Maybe, I'll say, but maybe Mr. Cannell could update me if I misspeak. I believe there are various options of either planting on-site and/or planting at another borough-owned site or contributing to a tree fund account.
And again, we understand that the borough wants to talk about that, and we can discuss it between now and final too.
No, it's going from 1 foot candle to a half a foot candle. We're using fixtures that are not very tall. They're in the residential size and type. They're 16-foot height, mounting height. So they're in a residential scale. So to increase the light on the sidewalk and to have a fairly good uniformity so we don't have significant hot spots and cold spots, we're probably going to have to add fixtures to meet that 1 foot candle. However, if we achieve the half a foot candle on the residential component, we will be satisfying the minimum enhanced security standard that the Illuminating Engineering Society recommends. It would, and if the board decides that we need to provide 1 foot candle, we will. What I'm just saying is I believe that providing that amount of light, which is essentially a commercial standard, is inappropriate in this setting.
You think, in your professional opinion, the half a foot candle is a better design alternative?
I believe it is, yes.
Any other questions to the landscape architect, engineer?
I just have a little question.
Go ahead.
With respect to the negative criteria, I know you call this an inherently beneficial use.
Yeah, I'll cover that.
Yeah, I think you should.
Yep,
I think you have to.
will do.
So really, you need to address whether or not The variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance.
I will cover that again. I kind of covered it in summary with some of the other discussion, but I'll cover it directly. The first component of the negative criteria is there any substantial detriment to the public good? Again, the plan includes a large amount of landscaping within the development site that contributes to the well-being of the residents and the aesthetic value of the proposed site. And the buffering to the residential units to the south will be substantial, but through the combination of proposed plantings and the preservation of existing plantings. So we're protecting those residential units to the south on Main Street through that buffer establishment. And as the plan is generally consistent with all of the other landscape requirements within the ordinance, we believe that the development will occur and provide a very nice visual aesthetic appearance and not create any nuisances to the existing residential units, which are essentially along Main Street and not along any of the other property lines.
It won't impact the zone plan of the zone ordinance?
Now, that's the second aspect. Is there any substantial impairment to the zone plan? In the zoning ordinance, it's the master plan and the zoning ordinance. The proposed use, again, is permitted within the affordable housing redevelopment plan. In this particular zone, this is what's intended for this site, except for the one buffer variance we're talking about. Everything else with respect to bulk standards complies. So we're, for all intents and purposes, compliant with the redevelopment plan.
And that advances the purposes of the zoning?
That advances the purposes of zoning specific to this lot.
Now, the purpose of zoning that you're referring to is 4055D-2C to provide adequate light, air, and open space. Is that correct?
That would be one of them, yes.
And that would also be,
We could also start
you said,
with,
you mentioned this, you just didn't mention the
Right.
letter, which is I, to promote a desirable visual environment through creative development techniques and good civic
Correct.
design and arrangement.
that is correct.
That's
But
your
the-
opinion? That's your opinion?
That is, and the main one is A, which is promoting the general welfare. We're doing that by providing a use that's consistent with the redevelopment plan, or essentially the master plan for this area. We're specifically putting what's intended to be here. So that advances the general welfare of the municipal land use law.
Thank you for that explanation.
We'll just, the architect is next.
Okay.
Sir, you want to raise your right hand? Can you state your name for the record, please?
Robert Cogan, C-O-G-A-N.
You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give the planning board in this matter is the truth, to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Cogan, can you give the board and the public the benefit of your background and education?
Yes, I have 37 years of professional experience since earning a bachelor's degree of architecture. I'm a principal in the firm Barton Partners, Architects Planners. We're out of Norristown, PA, although 50% of our work's in New Jersey. I'm a registered architect in the state of New Jersey. I've appeared before 35 to 40 boards across the state, but I have not been in Saraville yet.
Make a motion that we accept his credentials. Do I have a? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Okay, great. I just have a handful of boards. I'm going to go through some of the elevation drawings of the proposed buildings.
Okay, so, Mr. Cogan, these are drawings that were part of the submission package to the board, but these are just color versions of those?
Exactly, they're the same exact drawings. They were submitted as black and white. These are the colorized versions.
Okay, so why don't we just mark it for exhibits for the record? This is, I think we're up to A6 now.
A6.
And can you describe what A6 is?
Sure. And A6 is what we're calling the front elevation of a typical 24-unit building.
Okay, can you describe it for the board
Sure.
and the public?
There, as Mr. Salina had testified, there's three different building types, a 24, a 17, and a 12, and I'll show you those. I think that I'll go through some of the particular aspects, but one of the things I'd like to discuss in the very beginning two major aspects. One is that it is a very traditional residential design. It is something that's always is familiar. There's pitched roofs, there's gables, there's horizontal siding, there's stone bases and high pieces of stone, there's shutters, single hung windows, and things like that. That are all, we're not trying to be a very modern building here, we're trying to be a very traditional building we think will fit in very well. The other important thing to note is that we believe this architecture is what we call four-sided architecture. There's no rear elevation where it just becomes a straight wall and it's unarticulated. All four of the elevations are articulated the same, and I think what you'll see when I go to the other building types, all three of the building types are similarly articulated.
Great.
Okay. As an example, in this here we have three different types of horizontal siding, three different colors. We also have one of those three is a shake-like siding for a little bit of accent. In this white area here in these type upper gables is a fiber cement-based panelized area for a little bit of accent. We have some detailed elements up at the top, some little chocks at the frieze board. Stone base at the bottom, and then areas where the stone will jump up higher. What's also interesting to note here is that, again, this is not a flat building. There is a lot of articulation in and out and recesses and depressions. That I'll show in the floor plan. We'll kind of describe that, but since I have this drawing up here right now. All the windows are either surrounds, have a white window surround, or have shutters. So there's no windows that are unadorned. The other interesting thing about this, too, is our client is very adamant about this. That these buildings here, everybody has their own front door. Everybody has their own front entrance. There's no one building entrance that you enter into, and therefore there's a long corridor. So everyone has their own front door, and any staircases that are required are inside the unit. A little bit more of a sense of place and pride.
That's great.
And again, I'll show those in floor plan. It'll make a little bit more sense. But those areas are what I'm referring to here in these little shaded areas that are in between. So in this area here, there are 8 doors. And you enter into this courtyard. Courtyard you're entering through is a metal roofed portico. We have some columns kind of signifying where the entrance is. You pass through that area, and then you go to your entrance doors.
Great. So we're going to go to A7. And what's A7?
A7 is also part of the typical 24-unit building. And what we're showing here is what we're calling the rear elevation, although I just explained, the rear is almost the same as the front. And that's always, as you saw from the site plan with Mr. Zelina, the buildings are facing parking, and parking is very convenient to locate to each of the buildings. Also up here in the upper corner is a left side elevation and then a right side elevation. Again, it's a little bit hard to tell, but you can see with the double gable, there's ins and outs and detail. We have different colored siding than we do up in on the regular portion of the building, the main body, and another lighter color up at the top gable. Again, we're trying to do things that are break it up and make the building look very familiar.
Okay, and again, you're trying to make it so that the front and the back look the same, feel the same. There's not a quote-unquote back door.
That is correct.
Okay, so this is going to be A8, and which building is this?
Okay, this is a typical 12-unit building. It is more of the same materials, same architectural language in terms of some of the details. It's just a shorter version. And again, here we have just one of those entry porticos where you would have all the entry doors.
And all the buildings that are being designed all have that same direct entry. None of the buildings at all have a common entrance.
That's correct. There'll be 88 or 89 doors.
Okay, so we're up to A8. Can you explain what this exhibit is? And again, this is a
A9.
color.
A9.
A9? A9, okay.
An A9 is a ground floor plan, first floor plan of a typical 24-unit building. For shading here, this brownish color are 3-bedroom units. The orangish here and to the far left are 2-bedroom units, and then the yellow is a 1-bedroom unit. The interesting thing as I'm saying, in this area here, where I'm pointing to, this is where you're passing through the columns, where you have a little roof area, and then you can enter into doors here that are on the front, or you can enter further into the courtyard where you can enter into each one of your units.
Okay, and all these buildings have automatic fire suppression systems?
Absolutely, correct.
Okay, and they have washers and dryers, how do they do?
Yeah, all washer and dryers are within the units. There's no common washer, dryer, laundry area.
Okay,
And that, every unit gets that.
great.
I could go and show more. The other shorter buildings are the same exact diagram, they're just smaller.
Okay, I'm not sure if the board would like that, or, why don't we, how about the clubhouse? You have?
Sure.
I have a question on the housing units.
Sure.
They're all stairs, there's no elevators?
That's correct.
So the senior housing is
It's not senior housing.
Yeah, this is it's affordable.
affordable, I'm sorry.
So, but to your point, by state building code, the ground floor, all the ground floor units will be adaptable to, towards the accessibility code. Excuse me?
We can't have any questions. Ma'am, ma'am. Not your turn yet.
Mr. Coogan, can you explain what adaptable means, just?
Yes, the adaptable means that the unit is designed with all of the clearances that are required for full accessibility, door swings, distances between doors, distances between countertops, showers, all those things like that. And you can provide blocking behind a bathroom wall so that if there's a need, then a grab bar can be put in with ease. And there's some other little small things that are done to make it adaptable.
Great. And before we get to the clubhouse, just one question on the residential buildings. They all comply with the height requirements in the?
Correct, they're all 3 stories.
Okay.
Yes. So the community building is what I'm showing here. These are I have 4 elevations of the community building, A10,
A10.
and of which only the front elevation is color rendered. It is a 1,750 square foot building, 50 feet wide, 35 feet deep. The front elevation here, which is shown, it's the same color from the residential buildings of the siding, including the shake siding up in the upper gable. Similar standing metal seam roof, which is shown on the other building as well. The gridded windows, columns, stone base, and pitched roofs.
And the intent of the design of this was to blend in and mesh with the residential units for a
Absolutely.
cohesive look.
Absolutely correct. What's on the front elevation, what's also important to show, it's shown kind of hidden here behind our tree, is a 12-foot by 32-foot side porch, an open air porch.
Nice.
All right. And then I'll go to the floor plan. It is a single-story building.
Okay, so this is A11.
And A11 is the floor plan.
And just before we go,
Sure.
the floor plans that we've marked in the exhibits, that you have color on them, but again, these are the same floor plans that were as part of the package of the submission.
That's correct. This building here is more of it's a community building, maybe more so than a clubhouse that we might typically think of in other communities. What's inside here, the main functions of it, to the left-hand side of the entry foyer are offices, which are management offices by the applicant to maintain the facility, the community. There's janitor storage. There are restrooms. There's a small kitchenette that will be used in small doses when there's a larger gathering. And the primary function is a community room. The community room is about 18 feet by 34 feet deep. And they have programmed activities and meetings and such in this room.
Okay.
And there on the side is the covered porch.
And the covered porch is just for seating people on the
Yeah,
backs?
and outside activities similar.
I don't think there's anything else direct for the architect unless the board has questions.
That building has a generator?
Building does have a generator, yes it does.
Ancillary generator in case there's power?
That's correct.
Is
It'll be intended to not light up everything, but it'll be to light up the foyer, the lobby, the management offices, and then some of the street lights that are right outside nearby.
What kind of noise impact is that?
It's a small unit, it's 40 kilowatt. It's probably going to put off a sound of like 65 decibels when tested, and testing will be up to the applicant, but oftentimes we make recommendations that you test it maybe once a month for a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of the architect? If not,
As of now, that is the applicant's direct case. We reserve the right to respond to questions to the board and supplement the testimony.
any questions before I open up to the public? Anybody from the public like to speak? Come on up. State your name and your address.
Sharon Appel, 16 Quaid Avenue.
I need to swear you in, ma'am.
I'm sorry?
I need to swear you in.
It's here.
Raise your right hand. The testimony you're about to give is the planning board in this matter, is correct to the best of your knowledge.
Yes,
Swear or affirm that.
yes. Your last name, spell it, please. Appell. I have a question and
Speak into the mic, Sharon.
All I did was swear her in.
I have a question and concern about the stormwater that's going to be running off of basically the environment. I think the gentleman from Mazer said that there is existing piping that's already on Sayreville Boulevard. They're going to be tapping into it.
That's what he said.
That was my understanding, I
Yes.
believe?
Just want to refer to Exhibit A3. Yes, the testimony is that the current pattern of stormwater runoff runs from the south, which is along Main Street, to the north, to the wetlands and the river further to the north. There is currently a stormwater collection system installed within Sayreville Boulevard that outlets to the wetlands that discharge, that eventually flow towards the river. And the collection system on site will direct the water in the same manner which it's directed currently. We are providing for a stormwater detention system so that the rate of runoff from the site will be less after development than it is currently before development, based on all the DEP standards and requirements for stormwater management.
Okay, because my concern is, I live on Quaid Avenue.
And that's over to the east.
That's over to the east. I can almost walk to Acapulco, to the area. When I built my house back in the early 70s, my property was not in a flood zone. When they redid the FEMA maps within the last 10 years, I was put in a flood zone and did suffer from Sandy.
That's Quaid Avenue.
Right, right. I don't know where the water came from. I just know I had 4 feet in my basement. So my concern
During Sandy,
is,
you're saying?
I'm sorry? First time in 40 years.
During the Sandy event?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Prior to that, when we had a hurricane, and I forget the hurricane, I was asked to evacuate my house because they said the river was rising. My answer to the person that asked me to evacuate, I said, before I flood, we got the pits over there, they got to fill in. Now you're going to be building in those pits. We call them the pits. So my concern is, where is all this water going to go if I've already experienced a water damage? And they're behind my neighbor's house, you can hear water running, and she backs up to the blue area there.
Right, and the blue area is not a part of this development, but it's.
No, I know that,
right.
but right now, on heavy rains, there was always like a little bit of a brook there. It's getting bigger and bigger, and I have the storm drain in front of my house, and it's constantly running water. So there's runoff coming from someplace. So now you're going to be adding more to that.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The stormwater, our site's here in pink, and our stormwater currently flows in the north direction to the northeast to the wetlands and to the river. But with our development, we're going to continue to direct our runoff in that direction. It will not be directed to the east towards Quaid Avenue where you're located. There is significant land currently, and again, we alluded to it earlier about the amount of wetlands, floodplains, and everything else associated on this site. So I can't speak to what the issues are there because we didn't explore anything over in on that side of the site, but certainly within our development area, we will not impact any of the drainage issues or problems on Quaid Avenue.
You're not going to direct any of our stormwater onto Quaid Ave.
Well,
That
no,
is- that is
the water
correct.
doesn't come to Quaid Avenue. It actually came in through Brookside, which is the next street over. So it actually came in the back. I don't know where the water came from. I just know that there was a significant amount of water that came in during Sandy.
Sharon, all we can do is take them at their word that they're relieving the water problem on their property.
But putting it where, though?
They're putting it back into the sewer system that's gonna go out to the north, into the river and everything. Now, if it gets into the river and comes back down Brookside Avenue, they're not responsible for it.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, the borough has design standards for new construction and stormwater requirements. We had a 10-page report of technical comments. 5 of those pages had to do with his design. So we have some concerns about how it's designed. So eventually, before final approval is granted, he's going to have to demonstrate compliance with the borough requirements. In addition to that, there are outside agency approvals, namely the DEP. He's got to get permits from the DEP to be able to develop his property. So there's a lot of work they still have to do to demonstrate that they're meeting both the borough and state requirements for the stormwater that's associated with this new development. So that's going to have to be addressed before final approval can be granted and he can do any construction on the property.
Okay, my other concern was, there's only going to be one way in and out of, it's going to be the Seville Boulevard?
That's correct. That is correct.
Okay. What happens if the river does ever overflow? That area is going to be completely cut off.
I assume you're correct.
So there won't be any emergency vehicles going to be able to get in there?
Based on our review of the current floodplain, and we've applied to the DEP for a flood hazard determination, the land upon which we are developing and our access along Seville Boulevard is not in a floodplain zone, or flood zone.
All right. My other question is, you're saying there's going to be security there. Is that going to be paid by somebody, or is that going to become the burden of the police department?
I'm not sure.
In the clubhouse there? Is there security going to be in there for the clubhouse and for?
I don't think there was any testimony as with respect to security in the clubhouse. They're going to have, the clubhouse is going to be
Well, I mean in the
staffed during
complex.
day.
In the complex, is there going to be like a security guard or anything in there?
There's going to be a office staff, and there's going to be, there's going to be office staff, and there's going to be a superintendent on site.
Okay. All right. And as far as the lighting goes, they were talking about the one candle or whatever versus a half a candle. I know myself, again, living on Quaid Avenue, which was a very dark street, they put a very bright light. I love it because I feel very safe. I would rather see more lighting than less lighting. If there's a problem, get dark shades. I mean, I'm just looking for on a security basis. And with regard to the trees, you're going from 1,732 trees to 170 something, I believe it was.
And I guess we agreed, we don't know the exact number right now because it's going to be determined between now and final, and we've agreed we'll work with the borough between now and final and have a more definitive answer when we come back with the final application.
Sharon, after negotiation, they'll have to come up with a number of what they're gonna pay for, what they're gonna plant, where they're gonna put them, or if they're gonna the town has what they call a tree bank.
Right.
And then they would have to make a monetary contribution to the tree bank. So those trees are not going away, even though they're going away. They're accounted for, and they have to be accounted for later on. But we took that waiver off because the engineer gave me the indication that we want to talk specifics when that happens. So when they come back for final, they're going to have to tell us exactly what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and how they're going to comply with the borough ordinances.
Is there going to be a meeting when they come back for final?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, this is only the preliminary. The reason that we're doing this is because they have some constraints to get all their money tied up before September. And we granted them this with all of this up in the air in good faith. But if they come back here and they don't produce everything that they said they were gonna do, then we have a problem.
Okay. All right, well, like I said, my concern was the water, because I've been there, lived through it. So,
Unfortunately, it's not gonna get any better either. No.
thank you.
Anybody else from the public? Mr. DeSarno?
And just for clarification, and I'm trying, for the record purposes, these are questions and then there's comments afterwards, just so we have it, the procedure correct?
What do you mean?
It's open to the public. Is this for questions and then a section for comments afterwards? Because typically there's,
Comment by who? You?
no, by the public. I know there's,
This is their comment.
This is the public portion.
okay.
They're going to make their comments or
As well
ask
as
questions.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's fine.
absolutely.
Just making sure.
And who are you?
All right, Paul DeSarno, DeSarno, this is a space between the E and the S.
Sir, can you raise your right hand?
Yes,
You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give the planning board in this matter is the truth, to the
I
best
do.
of your knowledge?
yes. Okay, so I'm from 451 Main Street, which is that one lot that juts out a little bit more than the rest of them. I know there were other people across the street from me who couldn't make it tonight. You may know him, he's a former Marine, never a former Marine, but he's a Marine, he flies the flag. He was very upset about the whole thing. However, I noted, let's see, a couple of things. Number one, which really came in last to me, but you have no accessibility for handicapped people to have an affordable house in Saraville. I mean, you say it's adaptable or something. I saw stairs on every unit.
Not the first floor.
So there's first floor, you could roll right in with no ramping, no nothing.
I will let the architect address that.
That's correct.
Okay.
30 of the units are ground floor accessible at flood. 30 of the units are accessible directly, flush right from the parking.
Of those 30 units, how many are one bedroom, two bedroom, three bedroom?
I don't have that number off the 10, but I can give it to you in a few minutes.
But there's a mix of all of them?
Yes, there is.
Right. But inside, you have to do adaptable things, right? You have to add rails, things,
Correct. And
showers.
Showers. Primarily, it's about spatial requirements.
Okay. I noticed on I forget which one it was, but one of your plans has the yellow markings where you can build and the green where you can't build. Could you put that one back up for me for a second? Looks like you have some options to move a couple of things around if you wanted to. I'm not sure that you do, but.
Bear with me.
Yep.
1, 2, 3. Where'd it go?
You could fall
Oh,
asleep.
some of your things are two-sided. huh?
You know which exhibit it is, sir?
There you go.
The lot constraint plan.
Yes.
Exhibit A5.
Thank you.
You got
Okay,
it.
so on Exhibit A5, we're looking at, and I'm thinking about the people who are on Main Street, being one of them, hopefully soon. We have crowded down in that area the public accessible things, the tot lot, your clubhouse or meeting house or whatever it's called. Which side of that has that outdoor component to it?
The outdoor porch on the side?
Yeah, is that on that side? On the-
Yes.
So that would be, what?
The west,
south?
the west side of.
Southwest
yeah.
or west, okay. And then there's a top lot, which I haven't heard any real description of that. Is that just an open field where you can throw the kids in a fenced area, or what is that?
No, there will be equipment for children to play on there.
Okay.
It hasn't been designed yet, but that'll be part of our final.
All right, and that is directly adjacent to the families on Main Street now, correct? With the buffer?
With the buffer and approximately 12-foot change in grade.
Right.
When we had graded the original plan, there was a retaining wall, a good slope from the existing properties there. So we feel that the enhanced buffer, or the full width buffer, the change in grade and slope and whatnot, and the fence, the privacy fence being placed along the property line, there'll be adequate buffering and screening from
And you think
to
that's
the project.
that's the safest place to put that tot lot?
We've had to accommodate a lot of things in the site, severely environmentally constrained site, so we came up with what we think is a pretty good design, and it fits well there.
Okay.
It's in close.
Plan for that area?
I'm sorry?
Meet the buffers and set.
No, we definitely do, and one of the requirements would be to be in close proximity to the community center, the community house there, so it does belong there.
This area that's not the entranceway, you've chosen not to put anything there. Is there a reason for that? I mean, some of these other things could go there. The third item would be that dumpster that's right on the corner at the bottom of the property on the southwest corner.
That is correct.
Yeah. Have you thought about any other place you could put that, as opposed to being nearest to the people who are already there on Main Street?
Well, we most certainly have, and again, it's a masonry dumpster enclosure, dump screen enclosure, in excess of, I'm going to look here, maybe 75 feet from the property line, and again, at a significant change in grade below. The impact, I don't think it would in any way impact any of the residents that are fronting on Main Street.
All right, to add my voice to the young lady that spoke ahead of me, I think that more lighting is better, especially in this kind of an environment. I like the fact you don't have any common hallways. That's a nice touch. I like the fact that you gave back the buffer that you were asking for a variance on for us. I don't think anybody's going to mind a buffer of a reduced buffer along the high tension wires, but the attractive nuisance in the area is Little Acapulco, and you're going to have issues with regard to that, I think, ultimately. The other thing is now, we had, this was all just open space, you know, so there was vegetation, there was dirt, there was various things there. And before your development, the ground was absorbing a lot more water than after. So now it's going to be runoff. It's going to be runoff from paved areas where cars are parked. And it's low-income housing. There may be some cars that are not, you know, totally up to snuff. There may be some leaking oil. So you're going to have, even with the best parking lot, you're going to have dirtier water running off that than there was before the development, correct?
You could say that, and you could assume that, for instance. However, part of our stormwater management system includes stormwater treatment devices, and we also have a stormwater management plan where the collection system and devices have to be maintained. So there are 3 filters being provided to clean the water before it's discharged to the collection system off-site, and there is a maintenance plan that has to be maintained by the owner of this property. And what's unique, or what's good about this property, it's being operated by a single owner. It's not a condominium association that, you know, may have difficulty being maintained, where in this instance we have a very responsible owner, owns the property, and I would believe would maintain the stormwater collection system as well as the stormwater filters, so that we don't have an issue with any unclean stormwater discharging from the site.
Good to know. Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have.
Chester? Mr. Zach, you're next. You gotta get sworn in.
Ted Prisbilko, 503 Main Street.
Would you raise your right hand, sir? You swear or affirm testimony about to give the planning board in this matter is the truth to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes. P as in Peter, R, Z, Y, B, Y, L, K, O.
Nice Irish boy.
I just have a couple comments. I want to thank the board and the developers for extending that 50-foot buffer. I thought that was very important. I also have a little bit of a concern with the dumpster on the south side. As far as when is that going to be picked up and how big are they? You don't want a lot of overflow and waste. And then are they going to be picked up mid-morning or during normal working hours? Because those dumpsters can make a lot of noise being picked up. And that would impact some of the close residents there.
Well, first of all, it'll be a private carting service, so that it can be scheduled appropriately. let's say it starts out with, until the, until it's not fully occupied, maybe pickup might be once a week, but then it will be based on the need, so they can schedule with a private carter on a schedule that is needed based on the amount of trash or recyclables that are placed there, so. And it's premature to say what the schedule would be at this time, but that's something that can certainly be worked out or maybe discussed at a later date.
And there's a superintendent on site who can help coordinate that.
Absolutely, yep.
Are there any laws or ordinances on when garbage pickup can be picked up? You don't know.
No, but we can, when we
Okay,
get
well,
down,
they said they would
when we get
work-
down to the final, we can ask to make it at like 11 o'clock or no before 10 o'clock,
Right.
So you're not, what your concern is somebody coming at 6:30 in the morning and waking you up.
3 o'clock in the morning, yes.
Well, keep in mind, this is a residential development. It's not a commercial development where that might be more common.
Right.
Because there will be residents living here that have the same concerns, so.
And Mark, isn't it typical that they'll do commercial, like, since it's a private car, they'll do commercial sites first and then come to the residential sites like this usually later in the afternoon?
That has been my experience. Obviously, it's important for the commercial, we don't have to get into it, but yeah, well, we understand your concern. It's a residential development where the residents would have the same issues that you would, so I think there'll be some I think you'll be accommodated as this thing moves forward.
Next question is about the fence. What type of fence would be in that buffer zone, and who's going to maintain it in 10 years or so?
Well, the owner of this property will be responsible for maintaining the fence. And right now, it would be a solid fence, and I don't believe we settled on the material at this point in time, but the idea is to provide a solid screening fence so as to help, alleviate any of the noise from the dumpster or any visual impacts from the lighting or things like
I
that.
think on your plan, it says 6-foot vinyl board on board.
That was the intent, a 6-foot solid, but again.
And that's what we've been asking everybody to do in town anyway, Chester. Less maintenance on their part,
Okay.
a
And,
nicer product.
Last point that I don't know the gentleman's name brought up, but in regards to the applicant for waivers of approvals, variances, exceptions, and to be brought up again later, so nobody gets a blank check. I think that's perfect. This way we know what's going on with everybody.
That's it. Okay?
Well, we will be addressing the buffer variances tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Zach?
My name is Alvin Zach. I'm here in response to a letter I received at 465 Main Street concerning this development.
Can you raise your right hand, sir?
I'm sorry?
Can you raise your right hand? I'm going to swear you in. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give the planning board in this matter is true to the best of your knowledge?
I so affirm. I heard some talk about revised drawings. Are these the same drawings that were before, downstairs at the planning board for the July 14th meeting?
The plan that was submitted and was downstairs was part of our presentation. It's illustrated in Exhibit A2. This would be a colored representation, a colored version of that plan.
My concern is the notifications that I received didn't say anything about revised drawings.
Well, that is absolutely correct. What happened is, we were,
In response to comments we received from the planning board with respect to the review letters, we looked at the plan to see if we could modify it to respect the required buffer between this project and the residences along Main Street. We brought this revised plan with us this evening to show you how we can do that. We would be, as a condition of approval, we'd submit in these revised sets for the board professionals to review and confirm what we're telling them is the case. We presented it, we brought it here this evening just so we could, when we were explaining what we could do in response to the board's comments, graphically depict what we were proposing to do, because we knew the public might have comments on it, and we thought it would be beneficial to have with us.
I understand that. The problem I have with that is that if your notice had said there were revised drawings, the public could have gone to look at the revised drawings and show up tonight being more informed of what's being discussed and presented.
What we're saying is these revised drawings were not submitted in to the planning board. They were brought here this evening to address a comment from the planning board. We had briefly discussed it with the board engineer so he could take a look at it prior to that, but the applicant has the right to address the comments made from the board and from the board's professionals at the hearing, which is what
But
we're
I would
doing
think
this
the
time.
public would have a right to see those before the hearing.
And you will. Right now, we're here only for preliminary approval. We have to appear back before this board for final
I
approval,
understand that.
at which time we will provide not only the revisions, the engineering of this particular plan, but also a response to all the comments that have been raised by the planner and engineer.
I just think there's a fault in the notification process.
Sir,
So,
if I can have just a moment of your time.
I'm sorry?
If I can just address your concerns about the notice that you raised.
Yeah.
It's not unusual for applicants to come in with Plan A and based upon comments either by the board or the public, make modifications the very evening of the meeting where you don't even get a chance to look at a revised plan. In this case, the revision that's before you, it's true it's not on file 10 days before the meeting. However, it's to address the specific concerns that were made in the professional reports that raised the issue of the buffer along Main Street that are here addressed tonight. This is a preliminary approval. There'll be another opportunity for you to see those plans at the final. So I don't think there's any legal problem with the manner in which this is being presented. It's not a major revision. It's confined to that area over on Main Street. So I'm confident that the public notice requirements that the applicant has made in this case and the effort they're making tonight to explain the issues that were raised is adequate.
Okay, a couple other questions. Can we bring up the drainage?
Al, speak into the mic, please.
Yeah, we have to pick you up.
You have to speak into the mic. If I gotta be on tape, you gotta be on tape.
I'd be the only one that you hear.
I'm not sure what plan you're speaking to. Is this the one?
That one's fine. Where's the yellow?
Alan?
All right. Is this the drainage ditch from Main Street?
Yes, it
by
is.
Pulaski Avenue,
Yes.
alongside of the old Samsel property?
Yes.
Is the plan to pipe that or not pipe that?
No, it will continue as an open ditch to the wetlands that you see in the dark green area. We're not touching that.
Wouldn't it better serve the borough if that were piped to the back of the property lines on Main Street? Question. Second question,
We'll
right?
have our engineer look at it.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Chairman, there also may be some issues with DEP since.
Right
it is
now, it's an
considered a
open
wet-
ditch.
Right, but it's considered a wetland area, and there may be some difficulties from the state allowing permits to be granted to that, have it piped into the back of the property.
You're only piping it right to there, to the depth of the property. You end up protecting the two properties that are there, the abutting property owners.
We can look at it further,
They're
but
not
there-
my properties, all right? I understand that.
We understand.
Just point of information. The area up here, the area over here, partial wetlands, right? This area, partial wetlands. I would suggest the board consider creating conservation easements and wetland easements across those properties, so they can't be used later. We all know, eventually, they're gonna be dry wetlands. And then somebody's gonna come in and say, oh, well, that's all dried up now, we're gonna build all of this. So my suggestion to the board is that you consider that on a more permanent basis with a conservation easement and a wetland easement for those areas.
You already did that.
We have no objection to that. Again, the property that certainly is a point of discussion as we move forward to final. Let's leave it at that. We have no objection to it.
Lastly, with relationship to the variances and what's being considered de minimis changes, I find it very striking that Borough Council spent 2 or 3 years developing these plans. Planning Board looked at them, I assume, at some point and approved them. Now you have a developer coming in and already looking to get variances. Now, I respect his right to apply for variance. Law provides for that. But it would seem to me that with all the effort that the Borough Council and the board and everyone else put into this, to be granting variances at this point really makes no sense whatsoever to me. This is not a not-for-profit developer. This is a developer who's going to make a profit on this project. And, you know, if you're trying to be kind to him and save him money, I don't think that that's in the borough's best interest. And I think you're going to set yourselves a precedent if you make those changes now. Everybody's going to come in and say, I want the same thing. I don't want 1 foot candle, I only want a half-a-foot candle. You gave it to him, give it to me. So I think those are issues that you as board members need to consider when you deliberate on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public like to speak? Anybody else from the public like to speak? If not, I'll take a motion to close the public portion. I have a second. All in favor? Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just one comment. I had a discussion with the engineer, and just procedurally, if the board's going to act favorably on the application, the redeveloper's agreement requires Sarah's concurrence when plans are submitted. The plans that were initially submitted went through the Sarah process. They signed off on it. Sarah did not review the revised plans with the 50-foot buffer. I'm sure they're not going to have any issues with it, but I think it should be a condition that they get Sarah's approval before they come back for final approval.
No problem whatsoever.
You agree to that condition?
Yes, we do.
Assuming the board acts favorably on this?
Everything that we spoke about?
Just to highlight one other thing, and that is that it's referred to in not only my memo, but Mr. Cornell's August 21, 2019 review memo, that the applicant's going to, as a condition of approval, the boundaries of the affordable housing zone as contained in the redevelopment plan are not consistent with the property limits of the newly created Block 175, Lot 10.01. This lot now includes property zone for both affordable housing and residential uses. This issue was reviewed by me, and I prepared that memo dated August 2, and you've agreed to comply with that.
Correct.
Mr. Cornell, could you summarize all the engineering aspects of this?
Mr. Chairman, I had a very lengthy report. In there were some recommended conditions, so I'll just run through those quickly for you. The first would be perfection of the approval for the minor subdivision that was granted by Sarah. They still have to go through and file deeds, so a condition of this application would be that Sarah perfects that previously granted subdivision. Also, as I just mentioned, Sarah would have to go through and approve the revised plans that show the alternate layout for the 50-foot buffer. As Mr. Rogoff just indicated, the River Road redevelopment plan would have to be amended so the boundaries of the affordable housing zone correspond with the boundaries of the property based on the recent subdivision. You're only going to be granting preliminary major site plan approval. No construction will be allowed. The applicant will have to come back and get final approval, and at that time, any waivers or further variances can be discussed by the board. He will be required to comply with the conditions that were contained in the technical review in our report dated August 21st, as well as the items contained in Mr. Leoncavallo's August 19th report. And also, the affordable housing zone has a specific requirement for the types of units. It's 50% low income, 13% of which are supposed to be very low income, and 50% moderate income. I believe the applicant's going to comply with that requirement, but that would be a condition. They have to comply with those requirements for the type of housing to be constructed on the property.
Yes, we could.
That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, you've heard the summarization of the tonight's proceedings. What's your pleasure, board?
I'll make that motion that we grant the preliminary approval in accordance with the conditions that Jay outlined. And that Sarah approved it also.
And the Sarah will approve this. Get a second? Get a roll call?
Mr. Urkevich?
Yes.
Mr. Davis? Mr. Kelly? Ms. Lee? Ms. O'Leary?
Yes.
Chairman Ty?
Yes?
Thank you very much.
Application granted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public portion? No public portion. Go ahead.
Counselor, just want to make sure that the court reporter gets the transcript to the secretary, and if it's electronic, you can just email it to me directly. Makes it easier for me.
Sharon Appel, 16 Quaid Avenue. With this application, is this going to make us COA compliant, or Mount Laurel, with the Mount Laurel decision? Is that going to make us
Partially.
only
That's-
partially?
Yeah, that's part of our number.
Write down your email.
Okay.
If it comes through, I'll notification.
I will take a motion to adjourn. I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. You will be noticed when we have a hearing on this again.
You know what, I don't know that you're, gotta just guess.
Don't come back here again until September.
I'll come to you.
I know you want to come back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, do it then. Then I get it.
Which one, though? See, it says A-O-L or A-O
No
apostrophe?
apostrophe, no. Yep, take out that other one.
It's supposed to be 1,000 for me, not 500. Read it off to you. Yeah, if you want to do that, sure, yeah, that's fine.